However, I think what I'm treading in there is there's a lot of back and forth on that in terms of projected costs, what we were reasonably in a position to be able to settle for, all those pieces.
So essentially, we're at least $5 million under the cost estimate at the time of settlement.
No, that's not exactly accurate, because the projected costs at that time were factored based on a variety of assumptions. Certainly the costs that we are dealing with now, or the projected costs, represent a marked increase from where they were in 2019, 2020 when that process had first started.
Right, Casey, it's not that I'm trying to challenge any of the assumptions.
Sure.
It doesn't really matter at this point.
No, it doesn't.
The point I'm making is there's an additional $5 million estimated cost to fix the entire system today.
Fix the indoor piping, yes.
That's a fact that you're presenting to us.
And where we're at in that process is questioning some of those assumptions to be able to reestablish what I'll call kind of a continuum of options, as opposed to just taking the primary option that has been presented to us. We'd like to question that.
Understood. So this isn't the final number. This is the opinion of
Correct.
Probable cost.
That's correct.
That's a pretty loose estimate.
At this point in time, well, it's a yes, and it's based on the assumption of a complete retrofit or replacement of all the PVC piping, which we're saying may not necessarily be needed the way that our consultants are saying.
Mr. Taylor?
Please.
Since you made the foolish decision to pass the baton. So we've done a degree of work in trying to understand this mosaic on a macro basis. And the simple fact of the matter is when one builds a geothermal heat exchanger, it's designed to last many decades, correct?
Yes.
And this began construction sometime in the 2006 era when none of us, I think, were working here except Bob, right? And so for Dr. Summers to have that intimate knowledge of something that happened before his time, kudos to you. At the end of the day, it's a pretty simple analysis. Does the combination of the money the citizens spend for that particular heating and cooling system and the green benefits outweigh the money the community would spend on a traditional system? And we're working on a simple one-page summary of that analysis in terms of reoccurring cost, carbon footprint, or metric tons of CO2 emission savings, and how many vehicles off the road that means, and then capital reoccurring expense for periodic maintenance. So for example, over many decades, one would replace a boiler and a cooler. One may or may not replace a geothermal system. And in our particular case, we are almost paying to replace it. But initial, very conservative estimates in 2022 dollars, which means lower costs than it will be in 10 or 20 years, still show it to be extremely favorable in terms of being good stewards of our community's money.
We do have a few additional slides that, now that Mr. Foster has arrived, that we could share as a factor of where we're at today. So Bob, do you want to speak to at least these next few?
Certainly. My apologies for being late.
You're okay.
Issues. Gas cost comparison, you can say, and Mr. Schwartz sort of alluded to this already. Your gas cost savings for Palmer Ridge are tremendous, and you'll notice that this is, of course, in school colors. Blue versus gold, or actually that was orange originally, I think. Was that orange originally? I can't tell colors. So, so you can see that there has been a slight uptick in the very end there in, what is that, 2021 through that. And that is due mainly to an increase in gas usage. And then the next slide. The same thing with electrical use, and that has always been favorable to Palmer Ridge as far as that. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, you can see, in electrical for those. And then with the savings in that, you'll see that overall, a 4-year savings, 4-year cost savings, just based very loosely on the last 4 years, with real dollars, has been about $250,000 in electric and $130,000, almost $140,000 in gas. Over 20 years, if you extrapolate that out, using, as Mr. Schwartz said, a very conservative, because you're basing that on 2022 dollars and not applying any type of inflationary thing, adjustment to the costs, which is difficult to do at this stage, you increase the savings a great deal, almost $2 million.
So, Ron, I appreciate your comments, but I also was looking at this particular slide when you were making your comments, and our projected savings over 20 years is about 1.8, 1.9 million, which is the cost of the underground geothermal. It's not the additional 5 million in repairs and maintenance. So when we talk about this having a payback, I have yet to see where that's at, given a $7 million cost in investment. That's what I'm trying to get to here.
And there's actually Mr. Schwartz, there's a hidden slide. We can go to that one too. I put that together.
Run.
Where are we at, Bob?
I didn't see that.
The next,
Well, I'm talking to what is being shared publicly.
okay. I'd worked up that, but there is, if you apply over time, with any type of that, the things not included here are also, your average maintenance costs is about double at Lewis Palmer High School. Your average, just simple changing out the filters and doing those things is a little more expensive at there. The final cost of $4 million is based on, $4 to $5 million is now based on replacing all of that geothermal piping, all of the PVC piping inside the building. That is something we're still exploring as to what extent we have to replace that and to what extent we're comfortable and not replacing it all and doing a little bit less than total replacement.
Much appreciated. I'm just trying to address this public presentation.
Right.
And I'm just going to leave it at this right now, Chris, is that this isn't complete. And March, think you'll have this, or did I hear end? Really, work session, follow up.
Well, I think it all depends on how ready we can be for March 14th. So that was something we wanted to put in front of the board as consideration of that timeline. To include that update if we're confident in that. And I don't know that we want to take a look at this slide, but this is the one you're referring to, Bob. And it was originally hidden from view, which we can re-update this presentation. But
It was something that's sort of a work we had taken a look at over a 50-year lifespan, where it does result in some savings over the lifespan of the system. However, it's one of those things projected in the ongoing monthly utility costs are projected in current dollars, so those would increase, of course, with any type of inflationary adjustment. But I would agree that March 14th, I would say, and Chris, this is up to you, I mean, I would probably even push it out to April to get more complete estimates from different people.
100% agree with you, Bob. Is there a reason to do this on March 14th? Is there a decision from the board that's pending here? Because
Not
unless
until-
there's a decision from the board, I personally, as one board member, would prefer to wait till April and start zeroing in on more realistic numbers.
Do we have a T-minus schedule? What are the compelling events?
we need to know if the recommendation of the complete indoor pipeline remediation is the right way to. I think that's the whole intent that you had spoke to a little bit earlier, Chris, is where are we in that process and what can we have in the next few weeks to tee that up, because I think that could help revise what the potential recommendations or continuum of recommendations become.
Absolutely. The issue that we are dealing with related to the inside piping is the combination of the glycol mix and just pure PVC. What I am talking to Terry Proffer about, who is kind of he's sort of the chairman of geothermal, at least in the state of Colorado as well as nationally, is what is the contribution or what is the percentage of glycol that is needed in this mix, if any. The geothermal systems that I have built and installed down at Colorado College, they were pure water, because so you didn't have to sort of run into the situation of the PVC glycol and the brittleness that occurs with the PVC. And then certainly the installation of the PVC system. What the situation is right now is it's all sort of a single rigid system that it doesn't have any play in the system in terms of allowing thermal stresses associated with the temperature of the water for contraction and expansion within that PVC system. So we need to do those various different things, but they certainly aren't going to cost another $4 million associated with that. But that'll be our investigation. If we want to sort of do something very, very complete and have a contractor estimate by April, I see no issue with that. But I would be ready by March 14 to have a recommendation related to the direction we want to go and where we want to pursue additional costs, if in fact they are needed associated with the PVC system. That was what Casey and I had talked about previously.
But we are certainly happy to have a couple extra weeks to do some
absolutely.
additional diligence and come back in April. So back to your point, Mr. Taylor, I'm not sure that we're pressed for a decision by March 14th.
Is there anything compelling in terms of the existing system and a high level of risk by waiting?
Not at this time.
So it's stable for a good 120 days?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So, any comments or questions here?
So I just want to say that I appreciate that you just showed the gas cost comparison and the electrical use comparison, because as a citizen before I ever got on this board, my thought was, well, it's up on the Palmer Divide, so is it really effective or not? And this shows that it's effective, just the difference is the cost savings, can the cost savings outweigh the maintenance costs that we're dealing with right now? And that's something I think will come forth. But I will share that while I was up talking to other board members in different school districts, that while we were a pioneer in this, other school districts have started to move to this system as well and have been reporting. They shared that they are seeing cost savings and that it has been a benefit to their school districts, such as Sheridan School District as an example. So it can work, I guess.
And please keep in mind, this does not include carbon footprint savings. So for every window of time that goes on, there are X number of metric tons of CO2 that are saved or not emitted with a traditional system.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how accurate that slide is. I think there was a frame for the slide, but
Numbers back from Terry Proffer, our geothermal engineer, was working on this last night, and those are the numbers based on what he had given me as of last night. So he sent me those in last night. That is over 50 years. He had done his over 30 years, so I had to extrapolate a little bit on that and plug in some different numbers, but roughly 5,200 metric tons of CO2 over that. Mr. Schwartz, I think I'd sent you just an update on that really quick, that he had sent me those.
So basically it's 1,100, taking 1,100 cars off the road a year.
Yep.
So in addition to the likely fiscal savings, we're doing good things for the planet.
Yeah, and the nice thing is we have a nice logo about being green too. I like it.
we do.
Another project. But I do have a question about your two slides here on the gas savings and the electric savings.
Mm-hmm.
Is this just the total cost at each facility that you're comparing?
It is just, no, it is the electric and the gas broken out by,
Total electric,
total gas.
gas costs
right,
for each site.
for each site.
So it doesn't factor in square footage or size of these buildings in any way.
They're within 2,000 square feet of each other. So
So you ignored that.
no, I had calculated it out as a cost per square foot, and the square footage savings, I want to say it's 3 cents versus 16 cents per square foot. So 3 cents versus 16 cents per square foot.
For gas?
I want to say that was gas. It might have been electric. I'm not looking at the spreadsheet right now.
Well,
I wasn't prepared
don't-
for that part of the quiz.
that's okay. That's okay. I'm not trying to quiz you. I'm trying to understand what
Yeah.
this represents.
It's the yearly gross gas costs and that. And what we did was we went back and adjusted out the stadium and the outer buildings of Palmer Ridge, which are billed separately. They're metered separately. So Stacy
excluded them.
did a lot of
Right. So the
Yeah.
best you could, they're comparable.
that is as comparative to apples and apples as you can make them. Yes.
Okay.
It is, I was quite honestly surprised at that, how much a difference it was.
Any other questions, Tiffany or Ron? So are we all in agreement, Dr. Summers, that we push this to April?
Yes, with your direction, we will be looking forward to that update.
Okay, excellent. Any final thoughts? Excellent. Let's move on to B2, Strategic Plan Update Priority 3, Compensation Review.
So I think I just saw Kristen move toward the back. Kitty, can you see if she's, oh, there she is. Is Theresa with us, Kristen? She'll be in a minute. Okay. Or should we go to another topic and then come back to this when she's ready? Because
Yeah, let's just move ahead and we'll come back.
Yeah.
That's
I
a good
think we're ready for item 3, if that's okay, Mr.
Let's jump.
Taylor.
Let's jump.
Okay. So we're here to present a little more information, actually a lot more comprehensive information in regards to policy updates that will be presented to the board for a first reading going into the March 14th meeting. So Kristen, are you driving this first few? I'll drive, but you can speak to it.
Sure. At our last work session, we talked a little bit about one policy that needed to be revised, and that was GBAA. At that point in time, we were having legal take a look at it, and within GBAA are a number of policies that are referenced. So all of those were reviewed by legal, and at March 14th, we'll be presenting those policies. So,
First reading.
yes.
Okay.
I have a question.
So policy AC updates the language and refers to, there's a few more as far as definitions for legally protected status, so those will be within the new policy. There's a redefinition of prohibition, I can't say that word, prohibition on harassment. It goes into detail as far as reporting, investigating, and resolving complaints. And then 2 of the policies, Regulation 1 and 2, gives us more detail of those policies. It also refines the notice and the training sections of that policy.
Keep going.
Yes, please.
Okay.
So a couple revisions. It's going to be AC R1 as far as the complaint process. And then when you look at GBAA and JBB, both of those are sexual harassment. One is going to be for staff, and the other one is pertinent to students. And then we're also recommending the addition of ACR2, which is going to be the process, the grievance procedure for Title IX.
Question? What is the nature of the changes?
So, with the legal review, there were a number of changes, and you should have those that are redlined. So there's
Is there a summary?
the summary will be at March 14th
Okay.
meeting.
I think it's important to mention that because Title IX code has been updated and revised, these changes are reflected in all of those updated compliance areas. So what you're looking at in the administrative content section of the packet, and I'm looking to Ms. Wood to clarify this, what's currently uploaded in public content is the policies as they are currently written. What is being proposed is the red line versions that you can find in the administrative content. It's extensive. So you see a lot of strikes and you see a lot of red lettering. And it's comprehensive insofar as everything would be up to code with those with the lines and the red line doc that you see.
And similar to other policies, you'll see those items that are redlined. Some items are, the black ones are the ones that are staying the same. The red line, the red font is going to be the new language. And you'll see some sections that there's a strike through. So as Dr. Summers said, they're pretty extensive changes.
Is there a spirit of what these changes are attempting to achieve?
Yes, this is updated language that is a function of updated state law in coordination with federal law relating to definitions of sexual orientation, gender expression, gender identity, and then there's just some additional refinement to the language, again, around protected status. And the other big shift is our reporting, our investigation, our approach to resolving any Title IX complaints that may be issued. So there's significant definition to what that complaint process and what the resulting district investigation requires by law that have not currently been part of our most recent policy shift. And this is something that is changed just within this past year. So we updated these policies in August of 2020, and so we are still catching up now to more recent changes as part of the law.
So the spirit then, if I may attempt to paraphrase, is to update our policies to be compliant with current law.
Completely
That's correct.
compliant.
Okay. And then the spirit of it is to protect the district, the staff, and the students by being compliant with those laws.
Absolutely.
That is correct.
Who did the legal review? Was it CASB involved?
That was Kaplan and Ernst.
So our own attorneys.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Have you had feedback from CASB on these?
Here's what I can tell you in our conversation with our legal counsel is CASB's recommendations are kind of baseline. They're a little less robust than what is legally recommended. So CASB is certainly making recommendations to these changes, but our legal counsel goes another level, if you will, to get them all up to where they need to be.
Yeah, I wasn't looking for one or the other, though. I'm really trying to understand, or do we have both?
These recommendations primarily come from our legal counsel, less from a CASB canned list, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yep. But they're consistent with each other. It's just that this goes kind of next level. In particular, defining how we go about investigating and resolving complaints. That's where CASB's language is not quite as robust as we'd like it to be.
So historically speaking, and I'm a short timer relatively, we usually just followed CASB updates. So
That's correct.
This whole thing is different than what we've done historically in terms of policy update based on legal updates.
Given the sensitive nature of these particular policies, that was our rationale. Once we had reached out to share what changes we were looking at regarding GBAA or GBBA, pardon me, the advice that we were seeking recommended more of a wholesale update as opposed to a microcosm update. Yeah.
Very good. I appreciate that explanation because it does help me appreciate the extent of what I'm seeing, because it is not what I'm used to seeing, right?
Yes, this does, I would say, absolutely represent a shift from prior practice.
Yeah.
And not necessarily what we would do for every policy, but given the suite of policies, there's that rationale. Yeah.
Which is probably wise.
Right, and
Especially given the current sensitivity for several of these items.
Yes.
We believe so as well.
And when you're looking at CASB policy, it typically will say, you're required under law to have a policy. Here's an example. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the same wording, but the same content. So we did have legal review it, just to make sure that
Understood.
it's.
No, I understood that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tiffany, any comments?
I'm trying, so when I'm going through these red lines, file AC, non-discrimination, equal opportunity, and I go down to what page is this? 4 of 7 on the slides where it says notice. I'm just curious why Title IX requires us to share and to include the name, address, email address, and telephone number of the person designated to coordinate Title IX, Section 504 and ADA compliance activities. Is that the district
Yes,
information? Okay, sorry.
so that we have the appropriate individual identified who receives those complaints and processes those
So, for
complaints.
example, if it's Mr. Frampton, okay.
Correct.
But it would be the district information.
Correct. We're actually using a standardized or what do you call it? Not the individual, but the compliance coordinator of Title IX language so that it stays consistent in the event that there may be turnover in that role.
And that's law?
Absolutely, it's law, yes. We have to be responsive to any concern or complaint that is filed.
Sure.
So that's our process for
Right,
making
right.
sure that we're compliant.
I understand that. I'm asking, the law, it's so specific, so that's why I was curious.
Yes.
Ron, any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
So there's one additional issue beyond AC that I need to make sure I am bringing to the board's attention, keeping in mind that this is less of a formal review of a complaint, but a consideration of a community member, in this case a parent, who has brought forth a complaint consistent with our KE policy and corresponding regulation. So what I'm attempting to do here in these next couple of slides is just summarize that for you. There are attachments that we have loaded into executive content. At this point in time, we did not opt to make all of those public. It is involving a particular complaint that has been addressed through multiple steps of our complaint process. The complainant in this situation is requesting that the board review the position of the district, and the policy that's essentially in question is one that involves school closing and closings and cancellations. The essence of it, without going into a lot of the details, is that the parent would like to see, in addition or a revision to that policy, to include a line around non-mandatory practices when the district may be closed. And upon our review of this complaint, as well as our review of the corresponding policy, our position currently as a district is that we do not believe this policy needs to be amended. However, as this last slide shares with you, the step 4 of this process is if the complaint is not resolved at step 3, or the individual who is issuing the complaint requests review of this by submitting a written request to the Board of Education within 10 working days of receipt of the decision in step 3, which has been done. That is part of the attachment that's in executive content. So ultimately, this board has the opportunity to review based on where we are in that step in the process. If the board does agree to review the complaint by adding it to a board meeting agenda, the board's decision shall be made in writing within 15 working days after the board's review. And all decisions and findings by the board shall be final. So this is probably one of the first, I know it's my first, that has got to this point in the complaint process. So we're just opening this up for the board's consideration, and happy to take the direction from the board whichever way you may want to go.
It would be our first as well.
That's correct.
I'm not comfortable. I understand the crux of the issue.
Is that a question or?
Well, yeah, can you please attempt to re-summarize the crux of what the
There was
complainant would like to achieve
a revision of policy, specifically school closings and cancellations.
for non-mandatory?
Yes,
What
the
is that?
complainant believes that in this particular situation, a coach of a program created an unreasonable expectation to have athletes participate in practice specifically was over Thanksgiving break. There was a corresponding action from that coach when the player was absent that the complainant believes was egregious. To that end, the request was to have the district adopt a different stance and say, please don't make any practice mandatory. Our position is we think that decision rests best with the individual coach and program in question. We don't believe that issuing a policy stance such as this one is in the best interest of students, program coordinators, coaches, all involved. We think that that can be resolved at a more individual program level as opposed to issuing a policy that would govern everybody under a set law.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Excellent summary.
I have a question.
Sure.
So was it resolved with the coach?
The issue was addressed. There was, to the extent that there was accountability for recognizing perhaps an approach that may not have been best in that case, the coach did acknowledge that there were some things that could have been done different. However, I don't believe the complainant would say the issue has been resolved because there is a belief that until there is a policy that is in place that governs what I've just described, that the complainant believes that is the best way to move forward. So it's all a matter of perspective on that. Our perspective is that that is not what's necessary in this particular case, and that it can be dealt with at the level of the program or the coach that's involved.
So was it resolved? Was the student punished or not?
The student was held accountable. What was done was done. So when you're saying resolution, I'm not sure what kind of resolution you're asking.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, I can understand where the parent is coming from as
Sure.
a parent.
Sure.
And there's been multiple examples we've seen throughout the district since I've been here over the past 13 years where if there's a designated time off, if there's a snow day, for example, or if there's a holiday where there's an expectation that the student is not going to be punished for missing because they did not know they're supposed to be. Or I'm trying to think of it. Here's an example. I'm just going to give an anecdotal example as it applies to my own family. We say we're going to have XYZ days off, and families plan on those days off, buy plane tickets. Family and student travel somewhere, but then that changes, so the student is now punished or held responsible because of what their parents chose to go on vacation because we as a district said you would not be required to be in the school building. So in this case, if it's a Thanksgiving break and a family's taking a Thanksgiving break, if the coach did not prior to Thanksgiving break make it establish that, hey, don't take a Thanksgiving break, family, because you will be required to be at basketball practice. If it wasn't communicated properly, then I don't think that that's fair to the student.
I'm not sure that in this particular issue it was as much the communication as much as it was the expectation that players still showed up for practice. So,
Was that communicated, though?
to my understanding, yes, it was communicated. It just wasn't necessarily agreed upon from the family in the question. The family has a different
Gotcha.
approach to it than what the coach does.
Okay.
And that happens. So,
But at its core, what I'm hearing is the district's position is we have adequate policy and procedures in place. The parent, in this case, doesn't think so. They've gone through the complaint process or some
Correct.
protocol.
correct?
And we're at what step in that protocol?
The protocol has been maneuvered all the way through step 3, which is step 2 includes a building level or principal level response, which is essentially what I've described to you. Our district position is that was reiterated at step 3. So we're at the point where this doesn't go any further than you guys. So it really depends on the board's desire to either entertain the complaint in a formal review or upholds where we're at as a district in not choosing to review that complaint.
But in reviewing this complaint, if we were to accept that, we're essentially saying we want to review the policy, is what the essence of the
Both the policy as well as all of the corresponding actions that have been taken as a result of our investigation of this issue.
Well, yeah, we would review all that, but
Yep.
the ultimate change would be a change to policy.
That's correct.
If there
There's-
was one,
if
if we
there wa-
decide.
That's correct.
If there were one, right.
That is correct.
Ron, any thoughts about?
Having had kids participate in a lot of these sports and understanding the nature of what they're trying to achieve, my thoughts are that the professionals have likely done a thorough job here. And we should honor what they're doing and stick with them.
We're missing 2 other board members, so I would feel more comfortable with this being discussion where there's 5 board members to weigh in.
Where do you stand, though, as one board member?
Honestly, I stand with the family,
Okay.
but.
Well, that's all the
but I
more reason
don't-
to have 5 board members, because we don't have a majority here.
But I, like Mr. Schwartz said, I would appreciate time to process through this and understand and learn more. I mean, I don't think I have the ability to make, if you would ask me right here, right now to make a decision, if this was not a work session, I wouldn't be able to make one because I need more information.
Right.
And I'm also sensitive and understand that there's professionals that were involved in this, and I honor that as well, so.
So my opinion at the moment is I don't have a problem exercising the process. And so I'm not on either side here. I've not been through the process. It's not a bad idea to exercise that process. The outcome, I don't know what the outcome will be.
Sure.
Until you go through the process, you don't know that.
So, given what I'm hearing and our understanding of the need for a deeper dive, so to speak, into every part of this, which I will tell you is going to involve a lot. This issue has taken a considerable amount of time already. We're happy to put this forward as a formal agenda item for the upcoming March 14th meeting, which essentially makes this an official review at that point. And I will remind you that the board then is positioning itself toward making a decision in writing within 15 days of that formal review, so from March 14th, and that all decisions and findings from the board are final at that point.
Does this have to be at a board meeting?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, it would have to, if it involves the board, it has to be an open public session. So,
Well, let me ask you about so if we have a student that is, or perhaps a teacher that is, basically saying we don't agree with the district's position on something, those go into executive session due to confidentiality. So I don't know if this
those,
would
those
require that.
situations, and I'm curious Bob's thought, because I don't know if we've had a step 4. Yeah, Bob, you're sitting over there. You've had a little more years here. Because those would be situations involving the discipline of a student or the discipline of a staff member, that's what makes it confidential. I'm not sure that this issue as currently constructed represents a confidential review. I'm happy to get some additional clarity on that. I don't believe it does. I mean, obviously we don't want to make it about so much the individual as we are about the issue at hand, if that makes sense.
It does, but I heard you talk about this being, there was discipline to the student athlete because they didn't go to a practice or something. To me, that's why I keyed in on the discipline aspect of it.
Yes, however, the issue wasn't so much what the discipline was. It didn't represent a formal disciplinary action at the school level per se. It was the coach's way of holding the player accountable for not being at the practice. So yes, while we can certainly acknowledge that that's part of the frame that's underneath this, I don't know that in and of itself represents the crux. Yeah.
So I would ask that you follow up and determine that.
Okay.
I have a question too.
Yep.
Do we have a policy, or does the buildings have a policy that simply says that expectations will be accurately communicated?
Mm-hmm.
Then I go to, well, if it's communicated, then
I don't believe the issue was the communication. The issue was not agreeing to the stance of the coach or the expectation to have practice when the district was closed. That's the singular issue.
Yeah, so is it fair to say the issue is to either provide or not provide a given leader of an extracurricular activity, whether it's a sport or a chess club, for example, the capacity to make that decision?
Yes, if I'm hearing you correctly, that is part of the district's position, is we don't believe that a policy should govern that.
Right, exactly. So ultimately, this boils down to, does the leader of that extracurricular activity have the capacity to make that call?
Absolutely.
That's it in a sentence.
Yep. So, given that this is an exercise in applying said regulation to said policy, we certainly can bring it forth in the manner that's most appropriate for the March 14th meeting.
I'm kind of inclined to understand the policy better, and as a board, I don't think I want to be reviewing the regulations of a teacher or a coach. I'm happy to review the policy, but I mean, do you have a recommendation from this process of what the policy should say?
Our recommendation is to keep the policy as is.
From both sides, though. What is the parent saying about the policy?
The parent would like an amendment to the policy that does not allow for required practices during district closure.
Across the board.
Across the board.
And the same would likely go for all extracurricular activities, yes?
Correct. Not just sports, but anything that's extracurricular.
Yeah. DECA or whatever.
Correct.
Well, again, we're in a work session, so I think what I would expect here is not the full case review.
Okay.
I'm not interested in all that detail, frankly, because that might yet be down the road, right? I don't know that with any certainty, but where I'm at is, here's the policy, here's what is being recommended, and this is the pros and cons of that, and put that in front of the board. Does that seem like a reasonable approach?
So to that end, and I know we're not taking any official action today, but this policy has been reviewed like we review other policies. The reason that it was reviewed was triggered by this particular complaint. We did update our matrix to make the recommendation to keep the policy as is.
Been presented to the board
That is part of your policy matrix update that's
For
part of
today.
this agenda. Yes, sir.
for today. You were just highlighting it because of this particular.
Yes. What I need to do, I think, in order to effectively address the parents' desire to exercise every step of the complaint process is to let them know whether or not the board is actually going to officially review the complaint or not.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I am.
It's a tension of how we're exercising the complaint process. And it really is up to you all. I mean, I can tell you everything that we've done up to this point, it's whether or not you want to officially review or not. And I can get a better idea of what that review process would look like before March 14th, but that's the position that we're in.
I thought I understood. So I guess I'm still a little, I apologize. Are we reviewing the complaint or are we reviewing the asked for action that is being, does that make sense?
Both.
Okay. See, I've got a lot to learn still.
But what-
I'm not sure we want to review the complaint.
Okay.
I want to separate those two.
Okay.
Personally, I think the board should be reviewing the policy. It's in the policy matrix.
Correct.
Have you identified in that policy matrix the suggested change and why you've rejected it?
Not to that degree of detail, but in the corresponding attachments, yes.
Well, without succinctly stating that, it's hard for the board to address it because you've just left it as is without comment, right?
Left the policy, yes, within the context of the matrix, we haven't necessarily gone to that level of detail in the matrix itself. That's correct.
So that's where I'm going is it possible that we could just have that policy review like we do all of the other policy reviews? This is what we do all the time. But we're not really getting a policy review because you've connected it with this complaint, and where I'm going is disconnect it from the complaint, say this is the policy as is, here's a suggested change from the community, and this is the pros and cons to that and why we suggest that we're proposing no change, essentially.
Okay. We can certainly go at it from that angle.
To me, it's a simpler policy-focused review rather than getting into a complaint review. Now, if you want to go down that's a totally different process in my mind. That's why I was asking about executive session. Where's the confidentiality? I don't know the answers. I'm just asking these questions.
Because of the nature of this particular complaint being one that is seeking the resolution through a policy amendment, I think that's partly why we're at this point where the two are converging. Yeah.
Let's assume that you do the policy review as I've described it, and we, the board, say, yeah, we're fine with this, and we'll approve that. Then that doesn't resolve the complaint necessarily.
No, it does not.
Okay, so they're two different things in my mind.
But that's what this person is after, is a policy amendment. So I'm right there with you, and if the district's position is it's not required.
From the board perspective, I don't want the complaint to be put in front of the policy review, and the reason I don't is that's like putting the cart in front of the horse. I'd like to just stay focused on what the board's responsibility is, and that's policy.
That's fair, save for the regulation that spells out this process through all the way of step 4.
And I'm not opposed to the process.
Okay.
I'm not opposing this process in one way.
I hear you.
I'm not landing on either side of this issue.
Okay.
I'm suggesting a way to deal with the policy review is the normal way.
Which I think we're doing. I really think we're doing that.
And it's up to the district whether or not you want to add any color to that policy review then.
And we currently do not. That is our position.
Okay.
That is not changing.
Okay.
Okay.
So in terms of, are you guys okay with what I just said? in terms of that policy review? Because I want to then address the complaint. It's separate.
Well, that's where I was just going to go, is then we need to come to a decision point on the complaint.
Right.
Correct.
And there's a process, and I would just suggest that we follow that process, whatever it is.
Okay. What that is going to involve is so then I'm going to infer from that then you would like to see this officially reviewed as part of the step 4 of that process. And
Do I want that? No. But if
Okay.
that's what this complaint requires, then yes.
okay. It only requires it if the board wishes it in terms of how it's currently written.
And that's what I'm saying. I don't think we can make that decision here at the work session.
Okay.
That's the only thing I was trying
So
to say.
that leaves us with moving forward with a review, more official review with the board in entirety on March 14th. The manner in which we go about setting that up is really what we have to figure out.
And to Dr. Summers' point, just to make sure we as a board are clear, that puts us into a very specific time window for action.
At that point in time, yes, 15 days from that date.
Right. And that action needs to be in writing.
Correct.
Okay. So we just need to make sure that we have a degree of focus on this
That's correct.
from the 15th through the 30th as a team.
So this could take the entire regular board session.
Yes.
Potentially.
Would a special meeting be more appropriate?
With that in mind, I would make an assumption that it might be helpful to have the original complainant available for that meeting. We just have to figure out some of the logistics, and I can work with you offline on that, Mr. Taylor.
Ron and Tiffany, I kind of would go with what Tiffany's saying is on the 14th, I think we just make the determination whether or not we have a special board meeting for this complaint. I don't think we should put it on the regular session of our board. We have plenty of things already there.
We absolutely do.
So my inclination is what Tiffany said, is that on the 14th, we determine whether or not there's a special board meeting for this particular case or complaint.
With the complainant there so we can address them in person.
Okay.
And they can address us in person, more importantly. But it's their right to do it. So there's some value in exercising through these complaints, regardless of their nature, on a periodic basis, so that the public knows that the process works.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed?
I just want to make sure we as a team understand our obligations. Dr. Summers has laid them out very well with ample time for us to be ready.
Are you good?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Before we leave this, I just want to congratulate Kristen for the work that's been done on these policies, the approach that you've taken, and the impact that it's going to have.
Thank you,
So
I
thank you.
appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Are we good for item 2, Mr. Taylor?
I hope so.
Okay.
So I have the pleasure of introducing Theresa Lang with OCS Consulting. She's the president and owner, and she and I have been partnering together on this work. So if you come up and join us.
Thank you. So is this the PDF or the other one? Yes. Okay. Yeah, it's okay. Actually, I think
Yes, I'll pay you for
I
it.
can push this and reach. My notes are in the. Asking for PowerPoint, not the PDF.
I gave you breakfast.
Okay. So it's
Thank you,
on.
Mrs.
I wasn't sure if you were asking for the back there. If you
I'll ask you that later.
Okay.
Two dozen.
You'll just have to change your projection settings.
Thank you.
You're
Can
welcome.
you
I can help with that.
assist?
Yes, so it's showing,
It's showing actually 3 out.
yeah, so if we go to.
Let's take a 5-minute break while we're getting set up, if that's okay.
Thank you. Okay. I can. Yeah, but I think I know where you mean for me to go.
Right, if there's a specific setting for displays and projection. So if you go to that,
It's been so long since we've done this.
if you go to displays,
Where do you
top
see this?
level.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Arrangement maybe? Okay, so I see display up there. I have an idea if you.
Okay.
So we take this, just figure out. Actually, no, that's
This is on my.
if we, oh, okay, so if we just drag that to wherever, there we go.
Oh, this is.
So, I have a,
That won't help you with your,
Yeah, actually, well.
okay, you can still see your comments?
I have a question.
All right.
When we were talking about the updates,
Wow.
mine are not
Play from
red
start to
lines.
very left.
Thank you. It's like so.
I get you.
I don't see the red line on them anymore.
Oh, excellent, so you can still see your.
Are you looking at,
Perfect.
Am I looking at the right meeting? I'll see
look down
update.
to admin content. The public has the old policies. These are the red lines.
Okay.
Okay,
Would it be,
Back.
gotcha.
would it be more useful for you to?
Administrative. Okay.
Oh, right there's fine.
Yeah,
It took me a while to find them too.
and I was trying to look on my vacation updated. Yeah, I was looking, I was trying to get on board with this past week, when I was up in Cascade. But I could not, it was on my phone. and I could get into.
Okay.
Or is that not what you're
Yeah, but it'll work.
And I could go through the public site.
Were you
For some
able to
reason,
see your
it would not
notes?
let me
No,
use
but
my
I'll just
phone,
have
so I wasn't able to see, and I was very flustered.
Oh, so you don't see your notes?
That's my concern.
It's fine.
You could keep your notes on this computer and drive from
Yeah.
that one? No? Okay.
It's all good. I'll just.
Turn your mic on.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
All right. Are you guys, whenever you're ready?
Yes.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
You bet. Thank you. I'm like,
We're excited. We're excited
excited?
to
That's
hear
good.
what you
Okay.
found.
Awesome. Well, let's get rolling then. I'm going to walk through kind of a background of why I'm here, the scope of the project that I was engaged to conduct for your district, some of our market study results, some best practices from a compensation standpoint, and then our recommendations for next steps. So a little bit about us. I'm with Ocs Consulting Services. We serve, I say over 45 districts in Colorado. It's like 65. I don't know how many it is. I've kind of lost track. We also serve some districts in Washington, the 2 biggest districts in the Seattle-Tacoma area. We're working with them on similar kinds of studies. We've also just wrapped up a similar study for LA Unified, and that's the 2nd biggest district in the nation.
Wow.
Teresa, sorry to interrupt. Can you make sure to speak into the mic? We're recording this, and
Okay.
it'll help for our recording purposes.
Gotcha.
If you like really speak into it.
Yelling.
Yep. Thank you for
That's fine. Is that better?
a little bit better. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. And I can hold this, I guess.
Sure.
If I can
Whatever's
get it
easiest
out.
for you.
All right, let's do this. So, long story short, we've been doing this for over 25 years. One of the other things that we also provide in this geographic area, there's about 12, I'm going to say, districts in the El Paso County area and surrounding communities as well that participate in an annual salary study that we conduct. And so we provide some benchmarking information to districts. Your district has participated in this, I think, ever since the inception of the study. What districts do with that information is their choice, but we basically publish a copyrighted survey that they can then use. So some of that information was used as a base for the information that we're going to show you today. So the scope of the project and what we initially talked about with the district is looking at a market salary study for all of your positions. So your classified, your teachers, your administrators. Our intent was to look at not only your existing system, there were some concerns with the system and how it was working, and if it was not only competitive, but if it was something that was a system that was still one that we would recommend, given that most of the indicators that we could see is that this was a system that had been in existence for a very long time and had probably not been tweaked much to catch up with current compensation trends and practices. So given our study then, for us also the intent was if we could recommend anything with regard to job classification, the process, and competitive salaries and what we're seeing in the market today. And that's really what we specialize in, and that's generally the type of study that we are engaged in some of the other districts that I mentioned. So the first part of a market salary study is really to identify who's your competition and who are we going to compete against. And so, we really do exactly what this picture shows. we put a pin in the map as to where the district is, look at what are the surrounding communities around the district, what are the surrounding districts around the district, who are other competitors in the local labor market. The intent in my comp best practices would say it doesn't make sense to compare your positions to the pay in Pueblo or the pay in Fort Collins, because nobody's going to drive from Pueblo or Fort Collins likely to take a position in this district, nor are they going to come from Steamboat or Grand Junction or whatnot. So our idea is to look at your local labor market and use some other, we look at enrollment data, we look at also, you all are in a little bit of an interesting area from a geographic standpoint, because you've got Douglas County on one side, which is predominantly considered a Metro Denver district for comparison purposes and for competitive nature, but I just drove from Castle Rock, and I would drive down here to take a job. So we need to look at that district. We need to look at districts that are south of you and so forth. So you can see the list of peer districts that we included in the study. You guys can read those. I'm not gonna shout them out unless you need me to for recording purposes. But we chose, I believe that's 10 districts. And that's generally, we like to try to look at about that many, because we're gonna find when we look at competitors that not every district has the same types of positions that your district does. Obviously, every district has principals, every district has school secretaries, every district has custodians and teachers, but not every district may have a lead payroll tech. They may have a payroll manager, and they may have some payroll staff. So anyway, here we're going to jump right into it. And so here's a sample. And there's lots of numbers up here, but the intent is to give you a feel for the level of detail that we take when conducting these surveys. We're using and making job matches based on job descriptions. So we are not looking at a job title. We're taking a look at a job description that you have, that your district has, and those of the districts around you. And one of the things that we've been able to do with our annual study is we've amassed a collection of job descriptions and whatnot from other districts in the local labor market, or districts have shared that information with us on Google Drives or what have you. And so that's how we're able to take that level of assessment. Some of you that may work in the private sector may know there's surveys that organizations can buy that provide survey data. So for example, you can buy something from salary.com, but salary.com is only looking at a title to a title. So there's not this level of comparison of, is our building engineer at the elementary, middle school, and high school, they do these types of things. And not to mention some of those other, the salary.coms and Indeed and whatnot, those aren't really school district specific, right? So however, I will tell you that some positions in your district, we absolutely can look at private and public sector as well. So this is a good example. So in this building engineer, what we're looking at here is all the data from the districts that were included in the survey. The minimum is a starting base pay, max is the highest. We're focused on that midpoint. So where you see the yellow arrow, that's what we're looking at to try to determine if you're competitive, because our analysis indicates, and this is just a compensation kind of 101 factor, the midpoint of pay reflects target pay for a fully competent and experienced employee. So if I'm new in the job, I'm going to come in at the minimum. If I've coming right out of high school, let's say, in this position, I've got no experience, you're probably going to start me at the minimum rate of pay. If I've been working in this job for 15 years, I'd expect that person would be at the maximum. So what we try to do in our survey is we're trying to take all the information and come up with that midpoint, which is where we would target pay. And then we would suggest that you would set a minimum and a maximum that surrounds that midpoint of pay. So for this particular position, it is 14.5, I think that says 0.5% below the market. We would tell you that a general tolerance of plus and minus 5% to the midpoint would help us identify if a position is, quote, at market, or if the position is below or above.
I have a question before.
Yeah, sure.
So in the first section there, I've got the mean line, and then I've got the range, and then over on the right it says high on the range. Is that what that? Help me understand range.
So the range in that first rectangle at the bottom where it says mean, so that's just a pure arithmetic average of the minimums across the line. The range is just listing the low and the high. So does that answer your question? So the low is the lowest minimum and the high is the highest. And so really that's
an average of the range.
Say that again.
The range that says for the mid level, it's not the high in that column, so it's the average of the low one.
So really the range information is just frame of reference. We're not using that for anything other than just showing a high and a low. So the focus here is really at the bottom of the page where it's the mean all data, and you can see kind of an orange shaded mean all data, and I think it's 14. I feel like this is an eye test. 1495, I think, across. That's the average, the simple average of all of the data in the marketplace, and that's completely what we're focused on. So we're looking at that average, including not only the peer districts, but El Paso County, where there was no match, and then the city of Colorado Springs, where we did get a match.
And it just saves me time later, so the percentage difference is always to the mean.
Absolutely, it is. And it's to that mean all data, so it's kind of at the bottom of the page. So, sure. So this is just a kind of snapshot of all of the data for classified positions. So the red line that you can see sort of moves upward across the chart. We're going from low salary on the left to the highest on the right. The blue is the district. And so the district is kind of all over the map, which is honestly what I would expect. In a district where there hasn't been a comparison to the marketplace, we usually see something like this. We hope that the blue is closer to the red. In this case, the blue is quite a bit below on a trendology to the marketplace. And that's what you're seeing with the kind of faint dashed red line, blue line. Yes.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
So we can frame this maybe in the spirit that our constituents would. All the numbers are hourly?
Yes. So this is classified. So we're looking, so for our non-exempt positions or hourly positions are included here. So those are considered to be your classified, I'm not sure, you all might use a different term, but in the marketplace, classified or non-exempt, so hourly employees.
And then if one were to attempt to annualize this, would one use 2,080 hours a year?
That would be an average, but I would never do that with this group because they're hourly employees. So we want to look at their wage on an hourly basis because you may have a half FTE or a 0.4 or a 0.8 or whatnot. And so with hourly employees, we always want to look at hourly rates of pay to keep everything as apples to apples. For administrators or salaried employees, we would not want to compute that back to an hourly or a daily rate because, again, those are considered salaried positions for whatever deems to be their work year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think if we're comparing to other, it makes sense comparing to other public education K through 12 roles.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so, our comparison to the market, for example, the El Paso County, that data is reported and we've collected it in an hourly rate of pay as opposed to looking at what a person might make for total compensation over the year, if that makes sense.
So Kristen and Kitty, have you guys looked at, if I look at the light blue line that runs through the jagged blue line, and then I look at the light red line that runs through more of the market, that difference, do you know what that cost is in our school district?
No idea, because this data is so new. I mean, we literally just finished this in the last week. And I know that ultimately we want to know what that cost is, but we're just getting
We're
to
not
the
there
point
yet.
of figuring
Got
that
it.
out.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's probably a lot. I don't know. If we go through, I think we looked at, and I can't see my notes, but I think we're going to see how many positions we looked at and what that average is in the marketplace. So I'm going to move along with that. So we looked at, there's 34 positions on the previous chart that are below the market by more than 5%. And that, again, keep in mind, that's my tolerance is a 5%. So positions range from 5.3% to 37.4% below the market. There's 11 positions that are within the tolerance, and there's 4 positions that are above. So that's kind of our snapshot of classified. I'm gonna take you to a summary overall of all positions, but in the interest of time, I'll keep charging ahead. So next, we looked at your certified. So this is your teachers, and we've got a nice little colorful chart here. But the intent here is, again, we're comparing to the same districts. Obviously, we don't have a private sector employer that we can compare to in this case. I think we looked at about 16 different steps and I'll call them lanes and steps from the BA, BA30, MA, MA30, et cetera. And this is just a snapshot of what that data, oh, my cursor works, of what that data looks like for BA 0 years. You can see we have a match in every district because, of course, every district has an entry-level point on their schedule, right? And once we move from there, districts do different things. So in looking at BA Step 8, not every district has a Step 8 on their schedule because either they max out or they move people across. And so same thing with BA 12. Again, we only have a few districts and so forth. So we picked different lanes, looked at different steps. Our intent was to select cells where there would be high numbers of teachers because, of course, we want to know on an overall picture where most of our people are living on the schedule and how they compare to the market. So from a BA entry level, so this is the one that we just looked at, this is a picture. Here's where the district is where the yellow arrow is. So Lewis Palmer is here with a minimum entry point. Here are the rest of the districts in the marketplace. So Woodland Park is the closest. You can see pretty easily that the other districts are pretty far outpacing the district in that starting or entry level of pay. So we also looked, and again, not to get into the details, but this is all the different MA lanes that we looked at. We looked at some additional ones, and then this kind of takes us to the exit point of salary schedules. And I think the important thing here is across the bottom in each of these 10.9, 14.9% below, 11.9%. I mean, these are all consistently below the market. There was only one cell that we looked at that was within the tolerance, and that's the exit point of pay. And Kristen, do you remember how many people were there? Is anyone?
We have approximately 3 or 4 people in that exit.
Okay,
area.
so not very many. So when we look at the MA, so this is MA step 1. So presumably, and I haven't asked the district this, but this might be also where you would start special service providers, or somewhere in these categories. Again, the district is at the bottom, the black bar, and this is pretty substantially below the rest of the districts. This is D11, and here's Falcon. Douglas County, you see nothing because Douglas County has a banded approach, which is pretty much impossible to compare because every person has more or less negotiated pay. And the district is working to change that at this time. So overall, let me go back. So that's kind of takes us to where we are with certified. So across the board, below the market, and I think on average, around 9% below the market, but I'm going to show you more on that in a second. Here's a glimpse of the administrators. So again, for administrators, we're looking at a minimum and a maximum. Those are salaries, so that's an annual salary. Again, we're looking at the midpoint for comparison. Again, same tolerance, that plus and minus 5%. And then we did use actual salaries. So your district doesn't have salary ranges for administrators. That's a bit unusual. And so in order to compare you accurately from an apples to apples standpoint to the market, we've used an actual salary and then determined where that would fit in a range based upon the tenure and placement of those individuals and their salary. So let's look at an elementary school principal. That's what we've got shown up here. So again, we're wanting to focus on this midpoint. At midpoint, minus 7.0%, so 7% below the market. Again, this mean, I wish I had this cursor earlier when Chris had these questions, but this mean line shows us the average of the numbers above. So the minus 7% is your 100 to the 107,000. That's fairly simple math. So the administrator's schedule, on a bright note, it looks consistent with the classified. The administrators below the market, again, across the board. The blue line reflecting the district and the red reflecting the marketplace. And I think there's 20 some odd positions included in this mix. So we have 17 that are below by minus 5. They range from 5.2 to 34.8% below the market. 5 are at market pay, and then 1 is above by more than 5%. And it's by slightly, I would add. So here's a summary of all groups. So the classified, you're on average 8.4% below the market. Close to 70% of the positions that we surveyed are below the market by more than 5%. Certified, the district's an average of 9% below. 73 or 21% at the BA column are below the market. 99 teachers, reflecting 30% of your teachers in the MA column, are below the market on all the steps that we looked at. So if we add that up, we're right around 50% in those 2 columns, and they're all below the market. The administrators, on average, more below the market than the other 2 groups, 11.4%, 73.9% of them, the positions that we looked at, are below by more than 5%. So there's consistency, but this is, from my standpoint, in the studies that I do, this is a lot. We don't normally see this level of number of positions that we survey that are below that tolerance level. So to put that in perspective.
And I believe we looked at 70 different job descriptions.
In total, in all, but we looked at, I think, 54 classified positions where we had data to match up. And we looked at 20-some administrator positions and then the teachers. So that's a rough, yes.
Quick question.
Sure.
With full respect for the difference in cost of living and demographics, if we plugged in the school districts in the Seattle area and LA Unified, I assume the negative numbers would be even larger.
Yes, I would never do that just because we would never compare this district nationally. I would completely only support comparing locally because, again, you're not going to have people come from those places to work here on a daily basis. From a recruiting standpoint, that might be interesting, but for setting pay, I would only look in this geographic area. And in fact, our study in LA, maybe one of the biggest revelations was that LA was not keeping up with Long Beach, which was its neighbor. And that was really more important than not keeping up with Chicago and New York, where there was a completely different cost of living. So it's an interesting consideration. But yes, the numbers would be far less. And you know, the other thing that I would add to that every state's funding formula for education and finance and whatnot is different. In the Seattle, you know, in the state of Washington, all districts are funded in the same way. They all were required to provide like a 10.9% increase to employees a couple of years ago. Nothing like that happens in the state of Colorado. I was like, wait, what? So, you know, it's interesting when you start to look around how many differences there are. So you know, to my next point, the district's base pay is lagging the market. Why is comp important? What factors should we consider at this point in determining comp? What's a comp philosophy and what would a comp strategy be? So comp is important for all of these reasons. I kind of think of it as a pyramid. It's to attract folks to the district. It influences people's decision to remain employed. It's higher priority usually than the reputation of the employer. It's many times the top reason for choosing an employer and sticking with an employer. And comp really forces an employer to have a need for some sort of strategy to keep their folks and to enhance their ability to recruit. So what factors, if we were going to say, okay, well, what do we do next? What factors would we consider? I would suggest all of these. So any strategic initiatives of the districts, obviously financial wherewithal, goals, the market factors. I mean, the market right now in this area and in the state of Colorado is nutty. In the 25 years that I've been doing this, never have I seen pay for paraeducators and bus drivers increase by 8% in a year. And that's not even keeping up. And obviously the market is driving that. And what we're seeing is that we're raising pay and base pay, but we're still having a hard time hiring people. And so that speaks to that last factor, which is total compensation. And so total compensation is taking not only making sure our base pay is competitive, but what about everything else that we're offering to folks to keep them in a district. And you know, right now what I'm seeing with regard to bus drivers and paras are signing bonuses, retaining bonuses, easier access to benefits. So for in many districts, for years you had to work 25 hours a week in order to access the employer's benefits pool. I'm seeing that go out the window. We'll give you full benefits, drive a bus 10 hours or less because we need bus drivers. So anyway, that total comp piece I think is more important now than it has been in the past. So how does a comp philosophy guide this? So what I would suggest is that, and this is kind of comp 101, you have a comp philosophy, it's your North Star. It guides where the organization basically strategizes and how we determine what's important. So it's a statement guiding us, tells us why, provides where we're going to anchor pay. So do we want to be at the market? Can we afford to be at the market? Do we need to be partially at the market? And you know, in working with districts around here, and not necessarily in El Paso County, but I have a district in North Denver that they want to be above the market. They're always above the market. There's another district, we can't afford to be at the market. We need to be at 95% of the market. So those are those North Stars, that guiding light, if you will, for your strategy. So the goal ultimately then of this strategy is to attract, to motivate, and to retain. So it's all three of those things. And ultimately, I would recommend, and this is sort of a study process circle that I've developed and tweaked more and more in the last few years, but kind of starts at the top with your job descriptions, ensuring that that's your base, that we then look at some sort of external market salary survey, which is what you just did. We then take that to the next step, and this we're getting closer to Chris's, how much is it going to cost? We then come up with salary range recommendations based on this information, and then employee comp recommendations. So those employee comp recommendations are, okay, here's going to be our new range of pay. I'm making this up for the custodian. It's going to be $15 to $25 at maximum. How are we going to now take current employees and fit them into those ranges? So that's the employee comp recommendation. And then the final lap in the circle is notification and communication to employees, an implementation of that information. So next steps then, from my standpoint, would be for the district to think and come up with a compensation philosophy. What does that look like? Roll that into some sort of strategy, and that strategy may be that our philosophy is we want to be at the market, and our strategy is we need to move into this over the next 24 months. I'm making this up. And then our cycle is going to look like this. We're going to start with this piece with our job descriptions. This piece, we're going to take this data that I've compiled, come up with salary ranges with an implementation of July 1 of 2023. Again, I'm making this up. But that would be what I would recommend based on what we've found. So that's it. That's kind of where we're at, and I'm happy to answer any other questions. And thank you for inviting me in.
Thanks for this work. It's exceptional. And I had two requests for Kitty and Kristen. So one thing that we need to look at here is the PPOR. We need to compare PPOR for these same peer districts as we're looking at compensation, because they're slightly different and we have to accommodate those differences. And the next thing is what the mill, the annual mill is for these same peer group. Because ultimately we can do all we can do with what we have. And what we have comes from PPOR or the mills. So we have to look at the source of funding and compare how we stack up against these same peers with this compensation plan. That can help drive us into 101% or 97% of market or whatever it is. But we need to have that additional data. In addition to what I asked at the beginning is, what would this cost to be where we want to be, right?
Right.
I'm not even sure we know where we want to be yet.
No, and that kind of goes back to the comp philosophy, and maybe those factors will help drive that. What I will tell you, having done this, that question comes up frequently about funding and where districts are. And what typically we find is that with 10 districts that we're comparing to, it's averaged out. You've got the low, the high, and the middle, and so we kind of end up in one place at the end. And those numbers change, obviously, too. And enrollment changes. And so there's never really a great picture. We took a snapshot now. And so it's like, here we are now, but those things may change based on who passes a mill and what happens in the next year
And it does
or
all
two.
average out across the districts, but Lewis Palmer School District 38 doesn't change. Our
Right.
POR is what it is.
Right.
And we are some percentage of that mean. Whatever.
Sure. Whatever it is.
Right. So
Agreed.
that's all I'm trying to point
Sure.
out.
Sure.
So I have two questions.
Sure.
First one is, also let me back up. Good job to you and Kristen for getting this to us.
Sure.
Okay, it's very comprehensive. It's, I think, very easy for us to absorb and retain,
Great.
which is more important. When you look at the mosaic of how an employee makes career and job decisions, what percent of it is cash compensation and fringe benefits, and what percent is environment and culture?
I don't know that there's an exact answer to that other than
your experience.
In my experience, the reasons that I cited that compensation is important are from a massive national SHRM. SHRM is the Society of Human Resource Management study that they conducted in the last few years. And I think in what I'm seeing now is that as we have younger people entering the marketplace, so not people like me that are like, I'm all about the benefits, right? I mean, the benefits that school districts provide, I tell my 20-year-old kids, you won't get anything better than those benefits. But most of those 20-something-year-old kids, they want money. They may not be buying houses. They may not be, it's a different generational look. And so I would tell you that that cash value is more important. However, in my experience, districts don't promote the value of those fringe benefits as much as they should to help those younger people understand what those things mean, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, but I'll re-ask the question. Are the non-cash and fringe benefit items worth 20%, 30% of the decision process in your experience?
I mean, base comp should be over 80%.
Thank you. Second question. It is likely that at some juncture in the past, this district was pretty close to parity from a pay standpoint, and it ran away from us.
I have no idea.
So here's my question. If the team and the community choose to make a decision to get up to parity, how do we keep it from running away from us again?
You go back to this cycle. Because what I would tell you is that by continuing a cycle, you don't lose track. And so I have somewhere between, I'm going to say about 7 districts that have been following something like this for around 10 years or so. They continue, their line, their blue line and the red line pretty much stay together. They don't have the irregular heartbeat of things bouncing around. And that is because they're tying their comp to a strategy that includes looking at the market and moving positions to keep up with the market. And so what that means is we're taking that information, and I would suggest in a market like this, you have to do that every 3 years, or it runs away.
Similar
Thank
to
you.
when we check out, what's the projection of students, right? We have to keep it current, otherwise we don't have good information. And this is, as you said, great information that needs to be relatively current over time.
It would make sense for this to be part of our cadence.
Anything else?
Any positives?
Well, there's consistency. So many times when we conduct these studies, I mean, we'll find that one group has been perceived as being, quote, overpaid or being paid greatly closer to the market than another, and there's consistency. So from a community standpoint, there's no impression that, oh gosh, our teachers have been making more than our classified for years. I wouldn't say that, nor have the administrators been making more, nor have the classified been making more than the other groups, if that makes sense. So,
Actually, it does make good sense.
All right. Thank you very much.
of course.
This
Thank you.
was
So much.
one of the best presentations we've had in a while.
Oh,
Really.
thank you. I appreciate that. It's too bad I can't get the mic back in its.
Excellent.
So the next agenda item is number 4, legislative update.
Ms. Upchurch, would you like to lead us?
Sure. So did we send out those links?
The links are in the agenda, and I think Vicky's going to pull them up here for us as well.
Okay. So while Vicky's pulling that up, I will share a little bit. So as you guys know, I've been meeting with other school board directors across the state with the CASB Legislative and Resolutions Committee, where we've been reviewing bills. We vote on whether CASB will take a position or not. We are, as individual board members and administrators in school districts, encouraged, and it is imperative that we are also lobbying and advocating for our own school districts and our own teachers and our own students and families in our own districts. We spend about an hour and a half to 2.5 hours going through bills. Right now, I will say that there's been 413 bills introduced. There's about 72 that influence education. I don't typically pay attention to the ones that are assigned to the Military Veterans and Affairs Committee. That's called the Kill Committee. None of these bills have passed through both the House or the Senate, so there isn't anything that's passed yet. Most of them are just now having dates set for hearings. Have we pulled that up? Yep, okay. So one of the hot topics, which is, I'm trying to think, HB 1240, for example. I believe that's the right one. There's a bill right now that is a hot topic that that lobbyists and CASB are asking school districts to take a position on, and that is that they're trying to ban flavored vapes in Colorado. As we know that vaping amongst teens is a huge epidemic, and Colorado seems to be the state that has more teens vaping, and so that's been discussed a lot. Another one that has been discussed a lot, I'm going to go to educator school district focused.
Which one?
And go down to para employment after teacher retirement. So, and I think this goes right in line with what we were just talking about. When an educator exits out, for every year that they teach, or if they substitute, that affects their para. So since we are obviously at a shortage for substitute teachers, this is a means to try and get more retired educators to substitute teach. Did I get the right one, Dr. Summers? 'Cause I can't see behind me.
I'd already scrolled. You're good.
So that is a hot topic. Another one is we're looking at trying to get increased funding for our special education. That's SB 22-127. And it will be heard on the 18th of March. They're going to increase it from $1,250 per student to $1,750 per student. Keep in mind, though, that that's across the entire state. So that doesn't mean that we are seeing more money. It means that we're trying to get better funding for our students. On the counter side, what I've been learning is every time we see an opportunity to buy down the BS factor or an opportunity to increase funding for our students or our teachers, there's other things that come into play that counteract. So for example, there's going to be some possible things put on the ballot, and so those could end up countering any effort. So it's all still fresh and new. There's lots of moving parts, and so each part is dependent on what happens with the next part, if that makes sense. There's so much. Dr. Summers, any ones that come to your mind as you're going through?
Not necessarily specific bills at the moment. This grid, though, does summarize the current position that is adopted by CASB specifically. As you're probably aware, there are other lobbying groups that also adopt positions. There are times when those positions are similar across the educational advocacy groups, which include CASE. We are part of a group called the Pikes Peak Alliance. So there are member districts from across El Paso County. Actually, it goes a little bit further than El Paso. So we meet also on a weekly basis to discuss trends and details that we're hearing about, at times adopting formal positions. But this sort of does that in summary. So I don't know there's any particular bill I would want to highlight right at the moment, Ms. Upchurch, but as you mentioned, there's a lot of moving parts to all of this.
Something that you'll see as you're scrolling up and down, and if there's any particular one you want to ask or discuss, we can open that up, and please reach out to me. There are also a lot of discussion on, through the pandemic, we've seen how our standardized tests have or have not affected our educators in their review process. So there's one bill, for example, that CASB's taken a position of support on, and that is during times of emergency, when a state of emergency is declared, that student performance does not dictate how a teacher is reviewed, and that there's other means to find out if we have an effective teacher or not. Also, when we're looking through these, keep in mind that it's not always a unanimous agreement on whether CASB is going to support or not support a bill. It just depends on the big thing. And I love what Matt Cook, he's a good lobbyist, and I completely agree with him that I wish we could print up teachers that say Article 9, Section 15, local control, because we'll see bills come through that may sound like a fantastic idea, but they're either grant monies or they're unfunded mandates, or they encroach on local control. For local school boards, we control our finances, we control our curriculum. Right now, there is a discussion where the Colorado Department of Education is looking at graduation requirements, and it's been brought to our attention actually by some of our other school districts across the state that is that encroaching on local control, and the information that they want to collect, does that encroach on data privacy? So lots of moving parts. There was a lot of breakout sessions up at the legislative delegate assembly this past week where we talked about local control and case law that has affected local control throughout Colorado. So I think it's best to just have a discussion if there's any questions.
What is the timeline for actual realization of any of these bills? I mean, do they end in May or June, or what is their timeline?
So if a bill has not been heard, voted on, and agreed upon by both chambers by May, I think it's May, don't quote me on this, but I think it's May 6th this year, then it dies. The timeline for it to go through the process depends. It can get laid over. When it's engrossed, it means that, so first, let's say a House bill is introduced. I'm looking at choice and low-performing school districts, for example. So that would be heard in the House. That one, I think, is Education Committee. It's heard in committee. That's where testimony happens. And then if it's passed out of committee, it goes to the chamber. The chamber debates it, amends it. If it's amended, it goes back to the committee. If it's accepted, it goes to the Senate. The Senate then goes to their committee. They get to debate it, send it to their floor, and then if they make changes to it on their floor, it goes back again. So it's a back and forth process. And then if both agree, then it goes to the governor to be signed. So for example, that particular bill, I just pulled it up randomly. It was introduced, if you click on it, you can see that it was introduced on the 8th of February, and it was introduced in the Education Committee. It's being under consideration. It will be talked about, and testimony will be heard on that bill on March 3rd in the Education Committee, and it even has a time. Those also change from day to day. So it may be scheduled and something else takes precedence, and you don't see it. So, and if it's ever assigned to the Military Veterans Affairs Committee, it's probably not going to see the light of day. There have been a couple bills that have already failed out of and have not passed out of education. And so those just, they're done. Did that answer your question?
It does. So basically, until 1st of May, everything is nebulous.
It's nebulous until you'll see on this, the graph. Oh, that's another good one too, by the way. That gives you an updated status of who the sponsors are. You can click on who the lobbyists are. Once it's signed by the governor, it's done. So you'll see that some of them will start to go through their process and get signed before that deadline. Right now, there's no, the bills, it depends on what your priority is. So, Mr. Schwartz, maybe your priority is early childhood educator income tax credit. So you might want to pay attention to that one. And Mr. Taylor, maybe yours is continue workforce diploma pilot program. So you would want to pay attention to that one. And what I like about this CASB site is it breaks it down into student-focused, educator and school district-focused, and school finance and grant and tax-focused. There's a lot of bills to try and retain teachers. There's one to give about $784,000 out of the general fund for teacher stipends for the test. Teachers are one of the only, not the only, but one of the only careers where you have to pay to take your licensure and your testing. So you have to, not only are you paying for college, but you have to pay for your licensure as well. Your tests. I'm trying to see.
Quick summary question for you.
Yes, sir.
Based on your opinion and all the work you've done with CASB, when they say they've taken a position other than monitor on this homepage, is that a sponsorship position?
When they say that they have taken a position of support, then they are basically, and that position of support comes from the resolutions that we as school districts pass, and we as school districts direct CASB on a position to take. So that's why it's important to have that voice in CASB. Yes.
So where this little insignia, which is
the
circle with the arrow pointing down.
That is CASB position based on the vote from the resolutions committee.
Typically a supportive position.
No, not always. If you
Okay.
click on it, it may say oppose.
Okay, so my question is, you've been engaged in this for 3+ years, right? What's the batting average or success ratio of CASB getting the collective districts it supports positions successfully voting a bill in or voting a bill down?
That I don't know.
Okay.
I could tell you where it is now. This is my first year on the legislative committee for CASB. When I've been paying attention to this and I look at, I'd say they have a pretty decent batting average,
Okay.
honestly. The bills that are bipartisan bills have a strongest opportunity to pass. But CASB takes, I've also noticed that CASB takes positions, it doesn't necessarily favor one side or the other. One thing that I do appreciate is CASB absolutely favors local control.
Thank you.
I could look that up for you, though. It wouldn't take long.
It'd just be interesting to test the efficacy.
Sure. Dr. Summers, I know that Case is also engaged as well.
We receive frequent updates as the legislative session progresses, so if there's any specific items or bills that we need to think about going into more detail on, we're happy to do so in the future.
Yeah, so I'm glad that we have this on our work session, and what I would encourage my fellow board members to do is take a gander at this from time to time, especially before our work sessions, and look at bills that pique your curiosity. Because there's no way to go through 72 bills right here in 10 minutes. But there's some good ones, in my opinion, and there's some ones that I'm like, meh, in my opinion. But everybody has their own opinion.
Well, thank you very much.
Also, don't forget, on a legislative level, tonight is Colorado's caucus night. So here at Palmer Ridge, Lewis Palmer High School, Kilmer Elementary School, and Palmer Lake Elementary, there are caucuses. And that's your grassroots that goes into your delegate assemblies, but that's tonight at our high schools and our elementary schools. And stay tuned, because there are some initiatives that are looking at being placed. They've already been registered to be placed on the ballot in November that could affect financing in education for Colorado. And Colorado is one of only 6 states in the union that has local control as in their constitution. Don't ask me what the other 5 are, Mr. Schwartz, because I don't remember.
Do you have 2? Just kidding.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm sure those are going to get more interesting into April and May.
April, about mid-April is where things will start to get frenzy. But this is also an election year, so it might be a slow year too. We'll see. It could go either way. It always can.
Good. Let's move on to the last section, B5, board member reflections. And Tiffany, can we start with you, and then we'll go to Ron, and I'll conclude.
Oh, I think I kind of reflected already, based on local control is really important to me, obviously. And so I've actually really appreciated being a part of this legislative process with CASB and the alliances that we build with other school districts across the state, whether it be rural or urban schools. And this presentation that we just had on our compensation presentation was pretty impactful.
Ready for me to go?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. First of all, thanks to all the members of the staff for doing deep dives on 2 very important issues. The geothermal thing is critical from several perspectives, but most importantly, we want a safe, warm, and cooled environment for our staff and students to be successful. And it's a very large investment. We want to last decade after decade after decade to ensure that our daily operations are a quality experience. It's really hard to do that without quality teachers, however. So having them compensated on an entire manner, including our corporate culture, the environments we provide them to flourish in, and active and attention-paying students whose families care about their well-being, their education matters deeply too. So thank you guys for diving into that. That's got to be part of our continuing cadence. Lastly, there's a lot going on around us that is not about education. There's a lot happening around the globe. In our district, we likely have about 24 what we call foreign exchange students, and they're our global partners. And so if we can make sure that we're embracing them, reaching out to them, being sensitive to them, not feeling like they're on an island, it's really going to make a difference. The best way to enhance world peace is for us to exchange and engage in each other's lives around the world. I'm the product of it. We've had 5 foreign exchange students in our home here while we've lived in D38. It is a big deal. Awesome. It matters. It's a small number of our 6,800 kids, but it's a couple dozen kids that are going to go back to their countries and espouse their experience with us. And now is an important time to make sure they don't feel like they're on an island. So whatever we can do to reach out to them, it's a wonderful time to do it. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I concur with both Tiffany and Ron's comments. I want to thank Dr. Summers for this work session, all work sessions this year. They've been very informative, very detailed, and very pertinent to the operations of the school system. And I believe they're bringing some clarity into, a long-range model to forecast what does it take to run this school system over time. So thank you. I do appreciate the focus. And do you have anything you'd like to share?
There's a lot, but I think I'm going to summarize it this way if I can. We are looking forward to our next steps following the information that we were encountered with today. And we're moving into some budget building for this upcoming season with the understanding that we need to think through this both from a short-term and a long-term perspective. So I believe that modeling process you're referring to, Mr. Taylor, will begin to become more clear with accurate and validated data, which is what I really appreciate, both from our team as well as our consultant today. I think that information, while troubling and sobering, if you will, we have to acknowledge where we are in order to get really clear on where we want to be, and we intend to do just that. So looking forward to those next steps.
Thank you very much. So we can adjourn for today until March the 14th at 6 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.